Chris, and I'm leading us through these devotions each day of this week. All through this week, we have been and will continue to be drilling down into one of the most famous stories from the life of Jesus and looking at what we can learn from it. You know, this story, I think, is an amazing one. It's a story of a time where Jesus invited one of his friends, Peter, to take a step of faith, to take a step out of a boat and to walk on the water. And you can find the story in Matthew's account of Jesus' life, chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. We read it all through together on day one, so we haven't been doing that the rest of the days. But if you want to do that, why don't you just pause this devotion and read it through again now. So, a summary so far. So in day one, we said that the story really begins with the disciples alone in a boat, rowing or sailing across a lake, and Jesus wasn't with them, and they were having to row into the wind and into the waves, which was a real struggle, but Jesus was on the way. And on day two, we looked at what happened when Jesus arrived, that he brought hope and calm and courage in the face of fear. On day three, we looked at the invitation that Jesus brings to draw close and to step out into the more that Jesus has for us. We saw how Peter, with eyes firmly fixed on Jesus, had that courage that came from that and stepped out onto the water and walked. And then today's key verses are verses 30 to 32 of the story, which is once Peter has stepped out and started walking on the water. It says this. But when he, that is Peter, saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. I wonder if you've ever had those kind of situations where you've started to doubt a course of action that you've embarked upon. Or maybe you felt God calling you to step out in faith in some way, but as you walked that route, following what you thought God was saying, you started to have doubts. 4 or so years ago, we felt as a family that God was calling us to leave our home and our jobs where we had been for 18 years and to move to Andover so that I could become the senior minister at Andover Baptist Church. We sensed God speak really clearly to us about that, and we were really blessed to have lots of others pray with us and discern whether that was what indeed God was saying, and we figured out together that it was. And God has blessed us as a result of that move in so many ways. We've had some great experiences and some wonderful times together, and we've loved leading the church, and we've loved seeing the amazing things that God has done over these last few years. But there have been times, only a very few I should say, when I have wondered whether this was really the right thing and started to have doubts. So I can really resonate with Peter here when he starts to see the wind and the effect it's having on the water, and when that reality really starts to sink in, no pun intended by the way. He starts to get afraid, and critically he loses his focused faith on Jesus and who Jesus was, so he begins to sink. And he calls out and does what many of us would have done in a similar situation or do in times of need, "Lord, save me." And look what it says. We're told in verse 31, immediately Jesus reaches out to catch him. Immediately Jesus reaches out to catch him. But then, having caught him, Jesus says this, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I wonder if that seems a bit harsh. But little faith is not the same as no faith. And Jesus has accused others of no faith before now. A person of no faith would not recognize Jesus and call out to him. But Peter is not a person of no faith. He's a person of faith. I want to read to you from a commentary on the book of Matthew in the New Testament part of the Bible, written by Michael Wilkins. And when he's reflecting on this story, he says this: "A person with no faith would not recognize Jesus and call out to him. Peter has faith. It's just not functioning properly. It's ineffective faith. Peter's faith enables him to recognize Jesus' true identity and to request to come out to him on the water, but it's like a burst of emotional energy. It's effective enough to motivate him, but not effective enough to sustain him. The key element is keeping his eyes firmly focused on Jesus instead of the danger of the wind-swept sea. Faith is not like a commodity of which Peter needs more. Rather, faith is consistent trust in Jesus to accomplish what Peter is called to do." You see, Jesus invites us into the more that he has for us, and then he asks us to have consistent trust in him to sustain us through it. And then, once Jesus has rescued Peter, they go back to the boat together. And I think this is fascinating. We're not told exactly how that happens. We're only told that they climb back into the boat together, which I think means that they walked back together so they could both climb back into the boat. And if that's the case, this is more important even than Peter's walk out towards Jesus. It's not often talked about when we reflect on this story. It doesn't look like Jesus carried him or that Jesus walked while Peter swam. No, Jesus rescued him. And then Peter walked back with Jesus to the boat. And Peter was able to accomplish so much even after he'd begun to sink in his doubt and his fear. He'd been able to walk on the water again without sinking this time, stuff that he couldn't do before. You know, when we walk together with Jesus, when we walk closely with Jesus, when we journey alongside him, so much is possible. And we can overcome so many of our struggles, our doubts and our fears. Today's song is called Good Grace by Hillsong United, and it contains these lyrics. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high. Don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage. Hold on. Be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Before you listen to the song, and the link is in the description underneath this video, wherever you're watching it, before you listen, let's pray. Lord Jesus, help us to keep our eyes fixed on you. Help us when we often struggle with only a little faith, and we struggle with our doubts and our fears and our anxieties. Help us to keep focused on you, to journey with you, to have you alongside us. Thank you that you walked with Peter back to the boat. Thank you that you walk with us in the things you have called us to step out into. When we doubt, journey with us and give us courage, we pray. Amen.
God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember